Welcome to this specialized training module on Information Systems Audit Process Planning. Today, we aren't just looking at schedules. We are diving deep into the strategic core of auditing, risk-based audit planning. By the end of this session, you will understand how to transition from a checklist mindset to a risk-focused strategy that adds genuine value to an organization. Let's start with the bedrock of our process. Audit planning isn't just about picking dates on a calendar. It is the strategic phase where we define how we will execute our mandate. Everything starts with the audit charter. Think of the charter as your license to operate. Without it, you have no authority to inspect systems or interview staff. From there, we look at the audit universe. You can't audit what you don't know exists, so we list every process, system, and unit. This inventory is our menu. But we can't order everything on the menu. We don't have the time or resources. That is why planning is critical. It helps us select the dishes, or audit topics, that pose the greatest risk to the organization. Look at the flow here. We begin at the top with the audit charter. This document authorizes the existence of the audit function. Once established, the function defines the audit universe. That is the big box of everything we could audit. This universe becomes the primary input for audit planning. The planning process filters this universe to produce a focused audit strategy. It is a linear progression from authority to strategy. Now let's focus on the risk-based aspect. Why do we do this? Because resources are finite. We cannot audit everything. Risk-based planning ensures we prioritize areas where things are most likely to go wrong and where the damage would be greatest. We use a simple but powerful formula. Risk equals probability times impact. If an event is unlikely but would destroy the company, it's high risk. If it happens daily but costs pennies, it might be low risk. We also look at it as asset value times vulnerability times threat. If you have a high-value asset with a gaping vulnerability and an active threat, that is where your audit team needs to be. This approach shifts us from reactive checklist ticking to proactive value protection. This diagram visualizes the risk calculation inputs. On the left, we have our three variables: asset value, vulnerability, and threat. These feed into the risk calculation engine. The output is a prioritized list of audit areas. Notice the decision split. High-risk items get immediate audit attention, while low-risk items might just be monitored or scheduled for a later cycle. This filtering mechanism is the heart of risk-based planning. To plan effectively, we must distinguish between two types of risk. First, inherent risk. This is the raw risk. Imagine driving a car with no brakes or seatbelts. That is the gross risk. For example, a cash handling process has a high inherent risk of theft. Management then implements controls, cameras, safes, dual authorization. Once those are in place, what is left? That is the residual risk. As auditors, we measure if the controls actually reduce the inherent risk down to an acceptable residual risk. If the residual risk is still too high, the control has failed, and that is a key audit finding. Follow the transformation in this diagram. We start with inherent risk at the top. We apply controls. These are the brakes and seatbelts. The output is residual risk. But we aren't done. We must compare that residual risk to the organization's risk appetite. If the remaining risk is higher than the appetite, we have a control weakness, an audit finding. If it fits within the appetite, the process is acceptable. This logic drives our testing strategy. How do we actually perform the assessment? It is a 5-step life cycle. First, asset identification. You can't protect what you don't list. Second, we identify threats and vulnerabilities. Who wants to attack the asset, and where is it weak? Third, impact analysis. If the attack succeeds, does it cost us $1 or $1 million? Fourth, we calculate the risk. Finally, risk response. What do we do about it? This isn't a one-time event. It is iterative. As the business changes, so must our risk assessment. This sequence diagram illustrates the auditor's workflow. The auditor first queries the assets to find what is critical. Those assets are then mapped against threats and vulnerabilities. The interaction between threat and asset generates a potential loss or impact. Finally, that impact data flows back to the auditor, who calculates the risk level and determines the strategy. It shows the dependency of each step on the previous one. Once risk is identified, management, not the auditor, must decide how to handle it. They have 4 choices: mitigation, fixing it with controls; acceptance, living with it because the fix costs too much; avoidance, stopping the risky activity entirely; or transfer, buying insurance or outsourcing. As auditors, we don't choose the response, but we audit whether the chosen response is actually working and if it aligns with the organization's stated risk tolerance. Here we see the life cycle of an identified risk. It branches into 4 states: mitigation, acceptance, avoidance, or transfer. Notice that mitigation, transfer, and acceptance all lead to residual risk. The risk never truly disappears. it just changes form or ownership. However, avoidance leads to an end state. If you stop the activity, the specific risk associated with it ceases to exist. We also face our own risk audit risk. This is the chance we say everything is fine when it isn't. It is composed of 3 parts. Inherent risk, the messiness of the system itself. Control risk, the chance management's defenses fail. Detection risk, the chance we miss the failure. Crucially, detection risk is the only one we control. We lower it by testing more samples or using better tools. We also must define materiality. What level of error matters? In IS auditing, a material error might be a security breach, not just a dollar amount. This class diagram breaks down audit risk. It shows that audit risk is a composite of inherent, control, and detection risk. I've highlighted detection risk specifically to show it breaks down further into sampling risk and non-sampling risk. And crucially, it has the attribute managed by auditor. This visualizes that while inherent and control risks are existing conditions or management failures, detection risk is our responsibility to manage. We take all that risk data and build the audit plan. This plan dictates the who, what, where, and when. We use inputs like regulatory requirements and previous audit failures. We assign resources, putting our best people on the highest risks. We also decide our testing methodology, compliance testing to see if controls exist, or substantive testing to see if the data is accurate. We might even use agile auditing, breaking the audit into short sprints to provide faster feedback in dynamic environments. This flowchart maps the development phase. We start with inputs like regulations and risk assessments. These feed into audit planning. Here we make a strategy selection. Do we perform compliance testing, checking controls, or substantive testing, checking data? Or perhaps we adopt agile sprints. Regardless of the path, all roads lead to the final audit report, but the path chosen depends on the risk profile we established earlier. To wrap up, risk-based audit planning is about working smarter. It ensures efficiency by targeting high-risk areas. It improves effectiveness by increasing the odds we find the big problems. It aligns us with the business goals. We aren't just checking boxes, we are protecting value. Remember, this is a continuous cycle. As the business evolves, so does the risk, and so must our plan. Our ultimate goal is to provide reasonable assurance that the organization's assets are safe and its data is integrous. We end with the continuous cycle of risk-based auditing. We identify risks, prioritize resources based on those risks, execute the audit, and report findings. Crucially, look at the last step. Update risk profile. The findings from today's audit change the risk landscape for tomorrow, feeding back into the identification phase. This closed loop ensures our planning never goes stale.